So I'm Adam Neary. I'm a JavaScript engineer at Airbnb, and we are making a massive investment in GraphQL, putting it at the center of our API strategy for our product, for our customer support tools, for our internal tooling across web, iOS, and Android. Like GraphQL for us is the answer. You just heard from Jeff, and might have seen the announcement yesterday about the GraphQL Foundation. I'm really excited that Airbnb has been invited to be a founding member. I think I've mentioned in the past that Airbnb's strategy, philosophy around service-oriented architecture is a bit different from Facebook's. And so sort of by definition, our strategy around GraphQL is a little bit different. So it's really exciting to be part of this foundation where we're bringing together a lot of different companies with some different worldviews about back-end and front-end to make sure that GraphQL is really the dominant protocol for API communication going forward. I think it's really exciting. So what else? What else should we talk about? I don't really think that's the news story, actually. The differences in our strategies. I really think the news story, and we might be burying the lead, I want to talk to you about kind of the magic of building with GraphQL. Like, it's actually a lot of fun, frankly, to be building product with GraphQL, and I think we can move a lot faster. So I thought rather than talking about our strategy, we would actually show you and do a little bit of live coding together. What do you think? Seemed like a reasonable way to start. That's a good way to kick off GraphQL Summit. But first, I wanted to set the context. Like, why does this even matter? Like, why not just take a month to build that feature instead of a week? Why don't we just relax, take our foot off the gas, and do what we've been doing? And I think the answer for me really lies at the heart of why I choose to be at Airbnb. And so I hope you'll indulge me. I'll keep it to 2 minutes tops, I promise. And I believe we will bring it back to GraphQL in the end. But I wanted to give you some insight into why I'm passionate about this and why I'm spending my time doing stuff like this and not other things. The two reasons, the first is the mission. The team at Airbnb, from the founders on down, earnestly believe in this mission of creating a world where you can belong anywhere. And it's not just talk. We actually believe this. In fact, I've experienced it firsthand, this experience of hosts making a guest feel so comfortable, bringing you into the community, helping you find places to eat and places to go, things to do. It really creates a big difference. I've also experienced it as a host, actually. I'm a host myself, and you wouldn't believe the incredible questions my kids asked guests visiting from Australia and from Turkey. It really makes me feel like this is a special thing that's going on here. And it's not just welcoming people into your home and community anymore. Increasingly, it's about experiences, and people are taking people out and showing them the things in their community and indeed teaching them their craft. I was floored to hear about this woman, 81 years young, in a village about an hour outside of Rome. Tragically, she lost her husband, but found a renewed purpose teaching people from all over the world how to make pasta, as only an Italian nonna can. And the thing kind of snowballed. Other people in the community started to get involved, and other people started collaborating together. People started listing their homes. And what they found was that people were cleaning up the streets a little bit more. They saw some fresh faces around and began to take pride in their community again, a village that many people I certainly hadn't heard of. And people in the community are not just speaking in Italian, they're learning how to say hello not just in English, but also in Japanese and Mandarin, Hindi and Telugu. It's kind of cool, this thing that's going on. So the mission for me is a really exciting reason to be good at what we're doing, because I want to ship not just JavaScript, but also the belonging that comes with it. You write a couple lines of JavaScript, and real human beings are meeting in person and building empathy. Second reason is the team. Goofballs like these, both the gregarious and also the introverted engineers and also designers. The founders at Airbnb were met at design school and have nurtured a culture of design at Airbnb. And I've noticed, and I think you'll see where I'm going with this, when a designer hands you one of these turtle doves, these beautifully crafted designs, and you look at it and you go, oh man, it's gonna take a month, or that rare, grumpy-ass engineering manager saunters over, oh, this is gonna be hard. And says, could we do a more minimal version of this? Not like a hard minimalist version, but like, could we just do less? Or like minimal changes. Actually, could we just keep the page the same as it was and not do anything? I'm really tired, my arms are tired, I'm gonna go sit down. When an engineering manager or an engineer responds to a designer in that way, the engineer feels deflated, right? And frustrated, disengaged, might go stressed by some really expensive mustache wax, worse, I don't know. You can tell I don't know what designers actually do. And if in contrast to that, imagine the engineer instead says, yeah, or says, damn, Meredith, I'm gonna build the shit out of that. I'll have it ready for you tomorrow. We'll take it for a test drive. That's a totally different response from an engineering team, and it inspires a designer to do better work. It inspires them to take explorations they wouldn't normally take, and downstream effects, product managers start to feel like they can explore UX in a way they couldn't before. And so this whole process is really in the hands of engineers. Engineers are on the throttle. Engineers are setting the tempo for the teams. And so I think, when I think about where GraphQL fits in at Airbnb, it's really about making sure that we can set a tempo that inspires people to do the best work of their careers. This matters, right? And it's not about working nights and weekends. I have dinner with my family every night, with my wife and kids, and so I'm not working crazy hours. But when I am working, I want to make sure that my tools, my craft, are awesome, that they're sharp, so that we can all be the little Spartan JavaScript warriors we want to be, and that our users deserve, quite frankly. And so that's why GraphQL. And so thank you for indulging me in that. It felt good to say out loud. I think the tone of my talks has changed since I started coaching my son's soccer. And that's enough keynote for today. What I wanted to show you in the spirit of this sort of exploration is a product. So welcome, friends, to the luxury journey. This is a design that was an exploration that we never would have even considered designing or building if we didn't have a bunch of nasty-ass JavaScript dragons on the ground spitting hot fire everywhere. We just wouldn't have had time with everything going on. This is the luxury journey. I'll zoom it in a little bit. And the big idea here, a lot of people think of Airbnb and they think of crashing on a dude's couch or getting a vacation home for the weekend. They don't necessarily think about renting out an island for the weekend. But Airbnb is moving into this luxury space, considering not just homes, but also luxury experiences and concierge in the market to help you plan and design your trip. And so we wanted to be able to step people through what it's like. In this case, what if you're in the Swiss Alps? You might work with this trip designer named Laurent, and we'll take you through this really immersive experience. This is really nothing like our search results or listing details page. This is much more sort of editorial experience. In fact, the design lead on this vertical came to us from Condé Nast, and so you could say she knows a few things about this. And so from a design standpoint, for a product like this, what we really wanted was a really flexible system where you could push new content. The API itself could adjust the layout. You'd really push any variety of these components. And so instead of having field attributes like listing, title, or address, you'd really just have components with fields like title and subtitle, button copy, things like that. And so initially it was asserted, when we started proposing something like this, it was asserted that GraphQL wasn't a good fit for this, right? I'm just going to put together an API response. It'll be a JSON blob. We'll just push from the back end. The clients, web, iOS, and Android will just render what they're told. And I disagreed. We looked at it for quite a while. It turns out that GraphQL unions are a really good use case for this. Because if you had a REST response, versioning each of these sections individually becomes quite cumbersome. We deploy native apps that are in the field for a year, 2 years at a time. And so GraphQL unions were a really good match for this. So let's look at the query that would deliver something like this. Hope everyone can see. Zoom it in just a little bit more. And so what you have is, at the top of the query, you've got something that the route would handle. It would pass in the journey ID as part of the request, and some basic top-level details around the journey. But then you instantly get into this notion of an editorial content. And so here, many different types of sections, like the carousel that's portrait with titles, or image with titles, vertical line, just puts a vertical line in, right? And so for each of those, you just have fragments. So as we add new sections in the future, you're just adding new fragments. We're going to do this today. And as you update these over time, the API is really requesting the fields that it knows how to render. And so if you have a mix of iOS and Android apps out in the field that have been deployed over the last 18 months, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of what you respond, because the API is really describing for you what the client is capable of rendering. Okay? So what you would expect in the code, if I pull up one of those components, you see that okay? What we see here is the query fragment co-located with the component. And so you see the trip designer bio needs an avatar, a name, and a bio, which is just a string description. You can see by hovering over it that it's a string and that it's required. Thanks, James. And then you see how the component's rendered, and then you see our CSS. These are very, very small components. And then all of these components are then aggregated up at the route level. So if you have the journey route, just what you would expect, we have a simple mechanism to pull variables out of the URL. We strip the URL out, parse the int, pass it into the request, and everything just happens sort of automatically. It's the tooling that takes care of all the work. There's no stores, there are no actions or action creators, there's no reducers, there's no ajax get, there's no fetch, none of this imperative stuff. It really just define the query, pull the variables out where they're required, and define your query wherever your components are, and everything takes care of the rest. So this is the resulting product, and got a nice little parallax effect, not too obnoxious. And of course, the server renders as well. If I refresh the page, oh man, it worked backstage. It loads the image sort of preview and goes right in. So actually, if you open up the network request, there's no API request going out for the content. It's all server rendered, stashed in the DOM, and available on the client. So it's super fast with the CDN cache it when we need to. It's really, really quite awesome. So what does this look like to update? Let's take the update use case first if we wanted to change something. And I'll take the simplest use case if the API is already present, right? If the backend team's got out ahead of you, let's look at that. So in this case, we've got this title, subtitle row here. It says exceptional homes. And in the design, there's this kicker, is the term we use for it. It's part of our design language system. It's just a small uppercased string. And in this design, it's just a number, and it sort of gives the user a sense of where they are on the page. And I saw another design when they were using this for an itinerary, and it was like kind of the 12 o'clock, you're going to be cliff diving with Tom Cruise, and then at noon, you're going to be with the Michelin star chef. Luxury experiences, right? Let's get after it. So if we wanted to add this kicker, first thing I would ask is, well, is it in the API? So if I come to Playground, right, I would just find the journey title, subtitle right here, and I type K, and it immediately auto-completes for me. It knows the schema. This is not a surprise. And when I run this query, I can see in the API response the kicker's present. So we know this works. It's fine. If you wanted to explore the schema, that's pretty good from a discoverability standpoint, but if you actually wanted to explore the schema, you can do that. Now, at Airbnb, for reasons I've described in the past, all of our data is namespaced against the service that delivers it, which of course is absurd. So then you have to say, all right, is this Applebee's or Horcrux or Pumpernickel? No, in our case, it's Berzerker. Great. And that's where you find all of your data. Obviously, this doesn't make a lot of sense. I wish we had schema composition. I think you'll be in Martin Walraven's talk later this conference, and we'll see a little bit about that. I think schema composition is going to solve this problem for us, but in the absence of that, you can kind of navigate through here and see the types and whether they're nullable or not, et cetera. It's really super useful. All right, so we know we have a kicker. Let's go to the component itself. Same thing here. If I was looking at this in the code and I didn't happen to have Playground open in a browser, I can peek at the definition here, right? Because we have the Apollo VS Code extension, I can see right away that title and subtitle are required. The kicker is a string that's not required. Great. And then, of course, if I type it in here and save, I'm sure everything will work fine. What we should see is actually a number of files change. And this is going to be a dominant theme for the remaining time that we have today. Every time I save a file, if it's like one line of code that's changing, actually we've got code gen running that's going to change like 15 or 30 things, right? Or in this case, 5. And so what we see is in the git diff, oh, and by the way, if you're not using VS Code's great. You can get the git diffs right in the screen. You can get all of your terminal sessions. This, for a presentation, has the screen quite small and zoomed in. If you're on a cinema display, you're like king of the castle. So the journey title, subtitle, you see the kicker. And then if you look, we've also updated the TypeScript types. So TypeScript is looked up against our production schema and said the kicker is string or null. Great. Now that is imported into that same file. Bing. So when I add it here, it knows what it is. It can tell me instantly that it's a string. Okay? And now, if I were to add this to the component, of course, it's VS Code, so I just auto-import it like an adult. Content equals kicker, right? And, no problem, right? Wait. It turns out that kicker.tsx has required content. The content prop is required because the kicker includes a bit of spacing automatically, and so if you just pass in an empty string or nothing, set the spacing off. So here's a null check, super useful. So I'll just do a simple kicker and bang, and we're done. And so this is how quick it is to make these updates. Now, the problem is, if I wanted to look at this component in Storybook, well, traditionally, I would now have to go in and add the mock data everywhere and go into the unit test and add the mock data. That seems like a nightmare. So we made it a lot simpler. We just run a task in VS Code that generates the mocks. And it actually takes the updated query definition, which is extracted via the Apollo tooling. So you're sitting here bathing in these green check marks. And instantly, you see a couple things change. You see all of the sample data. We've got 3 journeys that we use as sample data in the shared development environment. And all the data is updated there. In addition, you see this Apollo manifest updated. So this is kind of a nuanced feature. The manifest will give you a clean list of all the GraphQL queries within the scope of what you're working on, which is useful in a PR, but it's also useful for operation registries. So we're using it in a way that we can then extract all these queries, register them through CI, so that in production, you can only run an approved query against production. You can't have bros just arbitrarily querying our data set. And so this is all built into the Apollo tooling automatically. It's dead simple. So now, I would expect you go back to Storybook, and what's happened here, I know it's a bit nuanced because it happened very quickly. We've got the actual data from our API flowing through to Storybook so that the first 3 are 1, 2, 3, and the last one has nothing. I can see, because we've got it framed at the top, that the spacing isn't off if the kicker's missing. Dead simple, OK? You go back into the product, and obviously, because of hot module reloading, it's already present. We wrote like 3 lines of code. We got 12 files that are updated. Mock data is updated, and the product is updated without even being refreshed. And at first, this was counterintuitive to me, because I thought, well, we haven't even run the query. But it turns out that the Apollo client's actually smart enough to recognize when it re-renders that we're missing part of the query. So it initiates a request for the rest, comes back in, and by the time I can get to the browser, it's already there. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's pretty dope. So that's a use case, dead simple. I'm going to put in here, add, this is my git commit, so we'll add journey, title, subtitle, or pardon me, add kicker. Because this is a commit, I can do whatever I want. James Baxley is great. Ship it. So this is a good use case for if the data is already available in the API. And what I want to show you as well, last sort of point on this, is when you push the PR up, you link to the design. You can say, listen, the API is validated via Apollo CI, sorted out there. Visual treatments are updated in Storybook and Happo. We confirmed it in localhost. No services are affected. This is just a front-end change. The user who's reviewing this, dude, you can build this in 2 minutes. You've got this change out, but the person reviewing it has the same experience. They can see the Apollo manifest if they want to. They can see that the kicker has become string or null. You can look at the couple places where it appears in the request hierarchy. Look at the mock data if you want, how that's updated. And then within the component itself, you see the kicker imported. You see it added to the query fragment. You see where it's used in the component and how the types are updated. As a reviewer, you have all the information you need to make an informed decision about whether this makes sense or not, right? This isn't like a competing framework called Rails that I happen to not like as much, where it seems like a lot of these things happen a lot more magically. In this case, it's very explicit, and a lot of this generated code is then checked into source control. We'll say, why are you doing that? Well, this is really why, because now with TypeScript, you can kind of have all the connections you need, but it's also very easy to review. Similarly, in Happo, which is a visual diffing tool that we use, it's very easy to this automatically takes screenshots, and there I'm doing like a left versus right comparison. As a user as an engineer reviewing this, I can see the diff, so I visually have an idea of exactly what's built. I don't have to take screenshots. It's dead fast. So let's take a second now to look at what happens if we want to build something entirely new. So this is a little bit more tricky. One of the key things that I mentioned, we're sort of automating some of the process. But one of the other key ideas here is that we always want to be unblocked as front-end engineers. We love our back-end engineers, fact, but it's a lot easier to love them when you don't depend on them, I promise. And so what I want to make sure is if we want to launch something new, that I'm not waiting on them, ever. And so let's look at this design. You see this massive, beautiful image, and we just call this single media. And there are several of them. Some of them are full bleed. They go to the edge of the screen. Some of them are inside the page container. All of them are responsive and maintain a 16:9 aspect ratio. And so if I wanted to add this, first thing I would do, of course, I would check Berzerker to see if such a thing exists. And it doesn't. There's no notion in the schema of single media. Now, the trick, my friends, is that the schema comes from this service called Berzerker, which I don't own. It's written in Java, which is like a magical voodoo language I don't understand. And so I'm never going to be able to put a PR into this service. The younger engineers are. It's really my problem. But what I want to be able to do, and this is something we've spent a little bit of time thinking about, is how do we fiddle with the schema in a way that doesn't totally put the company and product at risk? Because we want everything to fail. If you try to create a query that doesn't exist, CI should kill it immediately. But we also want to be able to fiddle with the schema and sort of explore and navigate and sort of iterate with designers before the thing ships. Because once you ship the new schema, native is going to build against it. As soon as that schema goes live, you need to support it for 2 years. So you want to have a little bit of confidence. And so the mechanism we came up with as a nice compromise, I'm going to switch over to a server we call Niobe. Niobe, fun fact, is a Greek character. She got in a fight with the other Greek god named Apollo, and he murdered all of her children with bow and arrow, as you do. And she wept endlessly until she turned to stone. We figured this is how our experience with Apollo might go, so we named our server Niobe. Just kidding, Jeff. It's great. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically hijacking the Berzerker schema. So you see this Berzerker schema.ts, right? And what I'm doing is I'm just going in, I'm adding a type called single media, which has an array of captions and an array of media, which is our luxury media. We just have this one object that can handle a portrait, a landscape, image, or video, and runs through our pipeline, which we'll get to in a second. And a Boolean as to whether or not it's full bleed. And then I want to be able to mark that it's part of this union as an editorial section. So when an editorial section comes in, it's going to check the type name to validate which type it is, and you're good. So I save it, 0 errors, bingo. And then, the schema without data is like a water slide without water, so we probably need some mock data as well. So we want to stay unblocked. What does that look like? Well, we've got this design. We use Figma and we use Zeppelin at Airbnb, great design tools. They're great because they keep us unblocked, because I can jump in here and grab this image and download it instantly. And then normally all of our APIs are coming through, or pardon me, all of our images are coming through the API. They go through extensive pipeline called the Fourier service, named after the mathematician, where we're doing everything from determining the preview that we can inline before the image downloads. It determines the dominant saturated color if we want to do an overlay on it. Determines whether the top is actually dark enough that we can put white text on it. Like a lot of stuff like that is being done automatically for us. It also transcribes it to multiple sizes so that we can handle multiple size images via source set. And so this is automatic. Again, harping on this idea today, if you're going to do anything more than 2 or 3 times, you should automate it. And so this is called Media Squirrel. And this was created by an engineer at Airbnb named Bree Bunch, who's amazing. I think she's here tonight. Hi, Bree. Yeah, what's up? Media Squirrel. Yeah, you're famous. So all this does is fabulous. You just drop the thing in and it gives you some loading spinners. This is an internal tool, obviously. This is not user-facing. And boom, it just runs everything through all of the pipeline. And then all you need to do, you come through here, now you copy the JSON, drop back into your code, and you can put it in here. So if you are busy and you want to get this thing out in an hour after you get the design, you just go strip all the images out, upload them through Media Squirrel, grab the JSON objects, drop them into mock code, and you're done. This is a lot easier than asking people for a zip file or a drop link and all this mess, right? And so I did this ahead of time because I didn't want everyone to have to sit here and wait while I copy JSON blobs around. So then now we have the schema and we have the mocks, but we need a way to intercept the remote response, because remember, we're getting a response from the server, so I don't want to have to copy that over. And so we're working very closely with the Apollo team, which is a fabulous team to work with. They're always listening to our ridiculous requests. And we came up with this mechanism for mocking. And this only works sort of in development and for admins. This is something we don't do in production, so it's safe in that respect. I just commented it out for what we were looking at before. All it does, sorry if you're not familiar with the ES6 sort of syntax, all it's really doing here is it's saying, listen, anywhere in the response tree, if you see a type journey as what you're getting back, pass in what you get from the server as an argument, and then screw with it. In this case, just spread the existing journey on and then take the editorial content field. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take these 4 objects and I'm going to kind of insert them in their corresponding place. And so, boom, we save and there are no errors. I think Peggy sacrificed an Apple Watch, in the name of the demo gods. So far, whew, everything's going great. So now, what I want to do here, I'm just going to refresh Playground, and if all's going well, what I should be able to do is type fragment. So single media already shows up, dope. If I go into the schema, which I was going to do, I see it right there. Single media is present and has the fields we just created 3 seconds ago. Great, so now the fragment that I want initially is always exactly what we said. So captions, full bleed, and media. And for media, I'm just going to spread the existing luxury media fields. Okay, now single media, I need to include in our query, and bang. Right, you're already getting a live response from another service with actual mock data that you just created. It's pretty sweet. Yeah, I think it's cool. Okay, so now obviously we only have 5 minutes. There's no way we could actually build this UI. The hell we can't. We're going to come in here, and I think I've mentioned 7 or 8 times we want to automate everything. So we're going to run a task. It's a Yeoman Generator. If you're a junior engineer and you're looking for one magical tool to get really good at to make your life easier for the next 15 years until the computers take over, I highly recommend learning AST transformations. It will save your life. And that's what we're doing here. So we've just got a Yeoman Generator. It's going to run at the bottom, and it's going to say, yo, what is the section component name? Is it going to be Superfly, Full Bleed, or 3 images with fries? Nope, ours is called single media. And what it's doing here, it's generated a couple files based on the templates we created, but then it's actually asking you if you want to go in and edit other files. And of course we do. Yes, we do. What does that look like? So instantly now we've got a mapping file where we name what the constants are. Then we've got the sections that actually does the importing of the file, puts it into a mapping that we can use when we're sort of iterating over that array and rendering the components, passing in the props. That makes sense, right? It adds it to the query just like you saw in Playground, right? Adds the fragment, boom, we're done. So then it creates the file, and it creates the test, and it creates the Storybook file, right? What you notice here is that the types are not working. Why do we not have generated types? Well, this may be obvious. If we look over at CodeGen, we should see an error. Right? This is the code gen that's running. It says, yo, bro, I don't know anything about single media. Why is that? Well, it's because we just created it, and it's looking against our production schema, so you can't develop against something you just created that's actually pretend. So the solution for this, short term, I believe there's already a fix out for this. You can actually just specify the tag. What we actually want to do, I should have published this earlier. We go back to Niobe. I'm sorry if I'm moving fast, just get so excited. What I actually want to do is publish the dev schema. So we have a way from here to publish the production schema. That's generally done via CI. What I'm going to do instead is publish under the tag called dev. Bang. So if we are in Engine, which I know you all are using, or will be, what you see here is a way to review the schema, just like if you were looking at your production data, just like if you're looking at Playground, Playground. But it also gives you all your metrics and a bunch of other tooling. What's cool here is that you see the SHA of the schema that's in production. You can switch over to the dev tag. And now, I should have shown you, if you're in the current schema, you should not see single media, right? Because it doesn't exist. Sorry, we're in dev. If you're in current, right, you don't see single media. But if you're in dev, you do, right? And so this is the key difference. Similarly, when I'm now coding, I need to be able to point CodeGen at that new schema. So we'll do a couple things. First of all, in Apollo, we'll select the dev tag. Done. So now it's already refreshed the schema against what we just pushed up. And I'm going to go into my Apollo config. Again, this is a short-term need. In our Apollo config, we're going to say GraphQL Summit at dev, right? And it's going to go pull that instead. And when I now run CodeGen, it's actually looking at the thing we just created. So just said a lot of words and used a lot of tools. The key thing here, the salient point that I want to make is the schema, the source of truth for it is the service. You might have your Fantasia version that you're running in dev, and you want to be able to edit against that, but it's never really the sort of source of truth until the PR goes into the downstream service. And so we have this mechanism that automatically code gens against this sort of playground that you're working with. But as soon as you were iterating with iOS and Android, you figured out a scheme that makes sense, you open the PR to the downstream service and remove all of these mocks, you go back to current and everything will work. If none of that made sense, catch me afterwards. What we're seeing here now, super exciting, now you're in single media and it does find the code gen. It was able to look it up. So now you have this idea of single media. You have all the other places in the query where that thing is used. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit this, yo, and maybe I'll just write Jesse is from Finland, but likes Swedish fish. This is what you can do with commit messages when it's all going away afterwards. So what we want to do now, we're getting to work here, right, is I'm not just going to pull in the generic placeholder type name. I actually want to get to work. So step one, I know I need luxury media, so I'm going to pull that in from a component we've already created called luxury media. Auto imports, again, man, it's like I don't have to write any code at all anymore. And now we have this real fragment. And so what I'll do is I'll say, for media, I want the luxury media fields, and I want full bleed, autocomplete, and captions, and we're done, right? And if I wanted to peek into the definition here, if I forgot what all those things were, it's right there. This has come from the schema we just created. We created this like 4 seconds ago. It's amazing. The tools are amazing. And so now I save this, and I'm just going to jump the gun and refresh our mock data. And now VS Code is querying the newly created schema and getting all the newly created mock data that we created, and it's all here, and it's ready for you in front of God and everyone. And all of the TypeScript types are populated with all the content you need. The Apollo manifest is updated, the new request. It's dead simple, dead clear where all this information is coming from. And to save you the arduous journey of me writing this component out, I actually just saved it. It's a pretty small component, so if you'll forgive me, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste the component definition over the top. So what we have here is single media. You see it brings in captions, full bleed, and media, does a couple healthy, responsible null checks, and then renders luxury media with a Fourier aspect ratio of 16:9 landscape. If there are captions, renders the captions, and we're done. We're out of here. In Storybook, right? This was not here a minute ago. It has auto-refreshed. Here we are. This is live data from the mocks that you just pulled out of your design like 4 minutes ago, right? Contained in a page container in one case, full bleed in another case. Like this is something that used to take a week. We just did it in like 30 minutes, right? And you look at the product, here we go. That's the placeholder I was intending to show you, but we were drifting on time. Right? Now we are server rendering this product on the super fast Wi-Fi that I've got. And here's a full bleed image in the product, right? Here's the one in the page container, etc. We just built this entire product in like no time at all. This is what it should feel like, right? And so this is what I wanted to share with you. It's exciting for me that different points in time, front-end engineering never felt like this, right? We're like waiting on back-end, we're waiting on design, our own tools are getting on our own way. All of a sudden now, fully unblocked. We push this into production, and the mock data are available for admins. I can show Ryan Chesky, what we're up to. Everything looks great. When the schema is available, we pull out the schema mock, we're good to go. When the data starts coming through from the back-end, 15, 16 weeks later, 4 days later, all of that flows through, and you pull out the mocks, and you're good to go. Right, we're out of this. And so that's what front-end engineering should feel like. And I think it's exciting for me that tools like GraphQL, Apollo Platform, React, Yeoman, Storybook, Figma, Zeppelin, VS Code, TypeScript, all of these things work really well together. Gatsby, My homies from Gatsby are here today. Super exciting tool set. I'm really excited that I got a chance to show you a little bit of it. I'm more excited that nothing broke. And if you have questions about how we're doing this, quite a few people from Airbnb here today. So Bree's here, Adam Miskevich, and a handful of people from our Portland office. So we're happy to answer questions. Super excited about this. We started with some live coding, so have some fun these next few days. Thanks.